If you do anything wrong in your life, and I find out about it, I'm going to try to take everything away from you. And I don't care when I find out.
What happens when a single moment on the world's biggest stage exposes the cracks in an empire built on image, power, and perception? On March 27, 2022, Will Smith walked onto the Oscar stage and slapped Chris Rock. At first glance, it was shocking, unforgettable, and controversial. But the real story goes much deeper. Most people thought it would blow over in days, maybe a week. A meme, a scandal, and Hollywood would quietly move on. But nearly 3 years later, the consequences are still unfolding. And two of the most fearless voices in comedy, Dave Chappelle and Katt Williams, have ensured it will never be forgotten. This wasn't just about a joke or a moment of rage. It was about a system that rewards image over authenticity, performance over humanity. The slap revealed the fragility beneath the Fresh Prince persona, the limits of celebrity power, and the invisible fence protecting comedians, until it was broken. Through philosophical insight, brutal honesty, and unflinching comedy, Chappelle, Rock, and Katt Williams have reshaped the narrative. And in doing so, they've cemented a moment that will define Will Smith's legacy forever. Stay with us. By the end of this video, you'll never see Hollywood, comedy, or Will Smith the same way again. The night Will Smith walked onto the Dolby Theater stage in Hollywood, most of the world expected a routine awards show. Celebrities smiling, cameras flashing, speeches rehearsed, applause timed. And then it happened. A moment so jarring it would ripple across entertainment, culture, and the very idea of celebrity accountability for years to come. Will Smith slapped Chris Rock. It wasn't a staged joke. It wasn't a calculated stunt. It was an open-handed strike that echoed through the theater, heard in homes around the world, and captured forever on camera. Chris Rock had simply made a quick reference to Jada Pinkett Smith's shaved head, an offhand joke that lasted seconds. But what unfolded next defied every unwritten rule Hollywood relied on to keep chaos in check. Will Smith, at the height of fame and influence, didn't pause. He didn't mutter an apology or step aside. He walked across the stage, struck Chris Rock, and returned to his seat. The audience, millions of viewers watching live, watched stunned as this figure, a global icon, committed an act of violence in real time. But here's where it gets even stranger. Hollywood applauded him. Less than an hour later, he accepted the Oscar for Best Actor, tears streaming down his face, delivering a speech about love, family, and destiny. The applause he received wasn't just encouragement. It was a validation of an action no institution should have condoned. And that moment, the standing ovation, was what transformed a shocking incident into a cultural crisis. For comedians, the response was immediate. Words are their lifeblood. Comedy depends on the freedom to say things that might offend, misfire, or spark outrage, but never to provoke violence. Jim Carrey called the standing ovation the most spineless moment in Hollywood history. Bill Maher made it clear that mocking someone's appearance, especially someone who had publicly shared their own struggle, does not justify assault. Across the board, comedians drew the line. Words and violence are not equivalent. Offense and assault are not interchangeable. And then came Dave Chappelle. Just 5 weeks later, the consequences of the Oscar slap would become painfully real. While performing at the Hollywood Bowl, Chappelle was attacked on stage by a 23-year-old man armed with a replica gun fitted with a knife. The attacker tackled him to the ground in front of thousands of spectators. Celebrity audience members like Jamie Foxx and Busta Rhymes helped subdue the man. But the message was clear. The invisible fence protecting comedians had been breached. Will Smith's act had made violence against performers feel possible, acceptable even, in ways it had never been before. Chappelle's response was a masterclass in turning trauma into insight. 2 days after the attack, he performed a secret show at the Comedy Store in Los Angeles, joined by Chris Rock. On that stage, the two men who had been assaulted, one by a celebrity, one by a fan, did what comedians do best. They turned pain into performance. Chappelle joked that at least Rock got smacked by someone of repute. Rock responded with a line that cut deeper than any slap. Will Smith was the softest person that ever rapped. The audience erupted, not just at the humor, but at the precision of the observation. It was a surgical strike on Smith's carefully curated image. Because that image, the Fresh Prince, the action hero, the blockbuster star, the devoted family man, was precisely what had allowed the slap to land in the first place. For decades, Hollywood had managed Will Smith's persona with near-perfect efficiency. Every smile, every interview, every role was carefully calibrated. But the Oscars exposed the hollow core beneath the carefully polished exterior. In one moment of rage, Smith revealed that beneath the charm and the fame, he was human and vulnerable, reactive, and profoundly insecure. Katt Williams, who had spent his career outside Hollywood's carefully managed corridors of power, added fuel to the fire. Where Chappelle offered surgical insight, Williams brought a flamethrower. In his landmark interview on the Club Shaw podcast, he dismantled the mythology surrounding Smith in the broader industry. He named names, offered context, and revealed patterns of behavior that most of Hollywood had spent decades hiding. Smith, in Williams' analysis, was not a victim of the system. He had been one of its most willing participants, embracing the fame, adhering to the rules, and enjoying the rewards. But when the carefully maintained mask finally cracked, the consequences were unavoidable. Williams' perspective reframed the Oscar slap from a single night of misjudgment into a case study in the machinery of celebrity. The system Hollywood relies upon, PR management, image control, media appearances, and curated emotional displays, produces stars who are polished, profitable, and compliant. Smith had mastered this machine for 30 years. The Fresh Prince persona, the blockbuster star, the family-friendly role model, he was Hollywood's perfect product, until he wasn't. What Williams articulated so clearly was that Smith's public unraveling wasn't an anomaly. It was the predictable outcome of a system that hides the human cost of perfection, of masks, of performance. Smith's career, already waning before the slap, had been teetering. Box office swings, mixed reviews, and a changing cultural landscape meant that the invincible Will Smith was no longer a guaranteed draw. King Richard, a prestige project meant to remind the industry of his dramatic range, had been his chance to reset the narrative. But the slap hijacked that opportunity, forever altering the lens through which every subsequent performance would be viewed. Comedy, more than any other art form, thrives on boundaries. Crossing them can create brilliance, but crossing them violently destroys trust. By attacking Rock, Smith sent a message that even words could provoke physical retaliation. And the ripple effect was immediate. Security protocols changed. Venues reconsidered how audiences interacted with performers. Comedians had to account for risks they never previously imagined. The consequences extended far beyond the Oscars, changing the environment for anyone who steps onto a stage. And yet Chappelle, Rock, and Williams turned this chaos into clarity. Rock's special, selective outrage dissected the psychology of the slap, highlighting that Smith's rage was less about the joke itself and more about the perceived emasculation and humiliation he experienced elsewhere in his life. Chappelle offered philosophical insight, showing that fame didn't change Smith. It illuminated his underlying nature. Williams revealed the structural failures and ethical compromises Hollywood demands from its stars. Together, they transformed one shocking night into a multi-layered critique of celebrity culture, masculinity, and the art of performance. By the end of it, the takeaway was clear. Will Smith didn't just strike a man. He struck a system, broke an invisible social contract, and revealed the emptiness beneath decades of cultivated charm. And the comedians, rather than staying silent, ensured the story didn't end with a trending hashtag. They contextualized it, analyzed it, and exposed the machinery that made the slap possible. This wasn't just a story about one night. It was a story about Hollywood's obsession with image, the fragility of fame, and the enduring power of comedy to confront truth, no matter how uncomfortable. For Will Smith, the consequences are visible in the years that followed. For audiences, the story offers a lens into the hidden costs of celebrity and the ethical vacuum that can emerge when applause replaces accountability. And so, as the curtain closed on that Oscars moment, a question hung in the air. What is Will Smith's legacy? The answer is no longer defined by blockbuster hits or carefully curated smiles. It's defined by a slap, a standing ovation, and the relentless work of comedians who refuse to let the moment fade. The Fresh Prince persona might be gone, but the lesson remains. In Hollywood, masks can only hold for so long, and the truth always finds a way to the stage. The slap had been immediate, the outrage instantaneous. But the long-term consequences, the ones that would reshape Will Smith's career, the comedy world, and Hollywood itself, took months, even years to unfold. And no one anticipated that two comedians, Dave Chappelle and Katt Williams, would become the unlikely chroniclers, critics, and, in some ways, arbiters of the fallout. Just weeks after the Oscars, Chappelle experienced firsthand what the slap had set in motion. On stage at the Hollywood Bowl, performing in front of thousands, he was attacked by a 23-year-old man armed with a replica gun fitted with a knife. The audience gasped. Security rushed in. Celebrity spectators, including Jamie Foxx and Busta Rhymes, intervened. Chappelle survived physically unscathed, but the psychological impact was immediate. It wasn't an isolated incident. Comedy clubs and theaters nationwide began reevaluating security protocols. What had once been an intimate, unpoliced space for performance suddenly became a potential danger zone. The invisible fence, the unspoken rule that comedians could speak freely without fear of physical retaliation, was broken. The Oscars slap had done more than shock audiences. It had created a blueprint for what is possible when fame, anger, and entitlement collide. And yet Chappelle did not retreat. 2 days after the attack, he performed a secret show at the Comedy Store in Los Angeles, joined unexpectedly by Chris Rock. On that stage, two men who had experienced violence, one by a celebrity, one by a fan, turned trauma into artistry. Chappelle quipped that at least Rock had been smacked by someone of repute. Rock's response, a line about Will Smith being the softest person that ever rapped, was precise, surgical, and devastating. It stripped away the veneer of invincibility Smith had cultivated for decades. The audience roared, but beyond the laughter was a recognition. The performance was not just comedy, it was accountability. Chappelle's analysis went even deeper. On the joint tour with Rock, beginning in September 2022, he offered an uncomfortable truth. Will Smith's Oscar moment wasn't an aberration. It was a revelation. Fame, Chappelle said, does not change a person's core. It simply illuminates it. The charm, the confidence, the perfection Smith had displayed for decades was a mask. And masks, once torn off, expose vulnerability, anger, and unresolved wounds. For 3 decades, Hollywood had allowed Smith to hide behind his mask. On Oscar night, the mask came off, and the real Will Smith, raging, fragile, and reactive, was on full display. Chris Rock's own reckoning with the slap would be just as meticulous. On March 4th, 2023, nearly a year after the incident, he premiered his Netflix live special, Selective Outrage, at Baltimore's Hippodrome Theater. For the first 50 minutes, he avoided the topic entirely, discussing broader social issues, woke culture, and pop phenomena, daring the audience to wonder if he would even address the slap. And then, in the final segment, he did. Rock's approach was methodical, almost surgical. He emphasized the sheer power imbalance. Will Smith was bigger, stronger, and in a position where retaliation was nearly impossible. He didn't dramatize victimhood, he presented facts. And then he struck at the heart of the psychological truth. Smith didn't slap him because of the G.I. Jane joke, the public discussion of Jada's entanglement, or even the mockery of alopecia. He slapped the safest target at the highest profile moment to perform a kind of strength he hadn't truly felt elsewhere. It was theater, not chivalry. And Rock made it clear, this wasn't about offense. It was about power, insecurity, and the artifice of celebrity. Enter Katt Williams. If Chappelle was the scalpel, Williams was the flamethrower. For decades, Williams had operated on the margins of Hollywood. He spoke truths no one else dared articulate, burned bridges deliberately, and refused to participate in the system's polite facades. In interviews, he didn't just discuss Smith. He exposed the machinery of celebrity itself. He revealed the careful construction of personas, the compromises required, the costs hidden behind every red carpet smile. Williams contextualized the slap within a broader pattern. Hollywood rewards compliance, punishes dissent, and constructs stars in exchange for control. Will Smith, in Williams' analysis, had played the system perfectly for decades, but the mask had always had a price. The Oscar slap wasn't an isolated misstep. It was the inevitable eruption of pressures, personal insecurities, and a career spent performing perfection for the public eye. And Smith's subsequent behavior only reinforced Williams' thesis. After Rock's special, sources reported that Smith hadn't watched it personally. Instead, he relied on intermediaries to tell him what was said. He issued a YouTube apology in July 2022, which Rock publicly dismissed as performative, a hostage video designed to manage image rather than grapple with accountability. Beyond that, Smith largely retreated into silence, his actions and public presence minimized, leaving the comedian's narratives to define the ongoing conversation. The consequences on Smith's career were already clear. Before the slap, his star power had been contracting. Box office returns were inconsistent. Prestige projects like King Richard had offered opportunities to reset his image. Yet the slap and subsequent media coverage hijacked that narrative. Later releases, including Emancipation, were received through the lens of irony. Audiences couldn't separate the work from the scandal. Hollywood's most carefully managed brand had become inseparable from one moment of public failure. Chappelle, Rock, and Williams collectively created a framework that ensured Smith's narrative could not be controlled by PR alone. Chappelle offered philosophical depth, showing the human cost of celebrity performance. Rock offered meticulous, pointed observation, highlighting behavior and motives. Williams offered the systemic, structural critique that no single comedian could provide alone. Together, they didn't just comment on the slap, they contextualized it within a larger cultural, social, and institutional framework. And the stakes went beyond comedy. By refusing to let Smith's moment fade into a hashtag or a punchline, these comedians underscored a fundamental truth. Violence against performers, no matter the justification, is never acceptable. The Oscars slap was no longer just a scandal, it was a warning. Comedy clubs, theaters, and venues across the country began enhancing security, erecting barriers, and recalibrating the risks inherent in performance. The invisible fence broken by Smith had to be reinforced by those who understood what was at stake. At the same time, the public perception of Will Smith transformed irrevocably. No longer was he simply the Fresh Prince, the blockbuster star, the family-friendly hero. He became the man who, under pressure, chose performance over humanity, theater over reason. Applause had once validated him. Now it amplified the fracture between image and reality. The mask Chappelle described, the careful persona Smith had cultivated for decades, was gone. And once the public glimpsed the reality underneath, it couldn't be replaced. The story of Smith's career post-slap is a cautionary tale about fame, image, and the illusions of control. Even decades of meticulous image management could not withstand a single night of human vulnerability and poor choices. The slap didn't just alter his legacy, it redefined it. And while he still maintains wealth, connections, and a fan base, the version of Will Smith that commanded unconditional admiration, the one audiences consumed without skepticism, was gone. Comedy in the aftermath also changed. Rock, Chappelle, and Williams demonstrated that humor could be both armor and lens, that pain could be transformed into insight. The incidents surrounding the slap, Chappelle's attack, and subsequent specials highlighted how comedians must navigate an environment where audiences, fame, and social media can transform words into risk. But they also showed resilience. Humor, when wielded skillfully, can enforce accountability, reveal truth, and preserve the integrity of the art form. Part 2 of this story closes with a stark truth. Will Smith's one night on the Oscar stage may not have ended his life or wealth, but it irrevocably reshaped his career, his public perception, and the rules of engagement in comedy. The slap wasn't just an isolated act, it was the fuse for a cultural reckoning. And the comedians, the direct victims, the analysts, the fearless outsiders became the architects of that reckoning, ensuring that Hollywood could no longer ignore what had happened. By the time Part 3 begins, we will explore the broader implications of this moment, how the industry responded, the long-term legacy for Smith, and the structural shifts in comedy and celebrity accountability that continue to resonate. By the time the dust had settled from that fateful night at the Oscars, the story was no longer just about Will Smith and Chris Rock. It had expanded into a cultural reckoning about celebrity, accountability, and the fragility of image in Hollywood. Part 3 of this saga is about how one moment became a lens through which every year before and after it would be interpreted, and how 3 comedians ensured the story couldn't be rewritten. After the slap, Will Smith largely withdrew from the public eye. His social media was quieter, his interviews rarer, his roles carefully chosen. Yet absence alone could not erase the incident. The comedy world, amplified by Chappelle, Rock, and Katt Williams, kept the narrative alive. Chappelle's The Dreamer special, released on New Year's Eve 2023, revisited the event in meticulous detail. He dissected the psychology behind the action, framing it not just as a celebrity outburst, but as a moment that exposed a lifelong performance. Chappelle's insight was subtle but devastating. Fame, he argued, does not create character. It exposes it. For 30 years, Smith had been performing a version of himself, the fresh prince, the action hero, the charming family man. But when he slapped Rock, the mask fell. The applause he received at the Oscars didn't redeem him. It crystallized the moment. Chappelle didn't condemn Smith outright. Instead, he humanized him while holding him accountable, showing audiences the consequences of hiding behind perfection. Chris Rock's approach in selective outrage was equally precise. He documented the imbalance, showing that Smith's aggression wasn't a reaction to offense. It was a performance of power aimed at the safest possible target. Rock exposed the theatricality of Smith's rage. It wasn't about Jada, the joke, or public perception. It was about asserting control where it could be achieved, and doing so on the largest stage possible. The slap, Rock argued, was less about offense and more about spectacle, and it revealed the fragility beneath Smith's public persona. And then there was Katt Williams, whose perspective added the systemic dimension. Williams had spent years on the margins of Hollywood, saying what no one else would. He exposed the machinery that created Smith's image: the studios, the media, the PR teams, and the compromises required to reach the top. In Williams's analysis, the Oscars slap was not an isolated event, but the inevitable eruption of a carefully managed life when pressure and pain collide. Hollywood had built the mask, but Smith's reaction revealed the human cost behind it. The interplay between these 3 voices, the surgical precision of Chappelle, the factual clarity of Rock, and the structural critique of Williams, ensured that Smith's moment could not be sanitized. Comedy in their hands became more than entertainment. It became a vehicle for accountability, a mirror reflecting the gaps between public perception and reality. Meanwhile, Hollywood itself faced an uncomfortable truth. Smith's career, while not completely derailed financially, could no longer rely on the automatic goodwill of audiences or the industry. Films released post-slap, like Emancipation, were viewed through the prism of the incident. Audience reception shifted. Even strong performances were filtered through the knowledge of that one night. The box office and critical reception became a complex dialogue between art, persona, and scandal. No PR campaign could fully erase the cultural memory of the slap. This is where the idea of legacy comes into sharp focus. What does Will Smith leave behind? Is it the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, blockbuster hits, and decades of charm? Or is it a cautionary tale about the limits of performance, the consequences of unchecked anger, and the fragility of carefully constructed images? For many, the defining moment is no longer a film role, a rap hit, or a red carpet appearance. It's the slap, the standing ovation, and the subsequent analysis by 3 of the most influential comedians of our time. The ripple effects extend beyond Smith. Comedy itself has been reshaped by these events. Chappelle, Rock, and Williams demonstrated that humor is not a trivial pursuit. It is a form of truth-telling that can confront power, violence, and deception. They showed that comedians cannot be silenced, that the stage is a space for accountability, and that the consequences of public performance are both immediate and lasting. Security measures in comedy venues changed. Venues reconsidered the relationship between audience and performer. The invisible fence, once unquestioned, had been broken, but it was restored in a new form: reinforced by the courage and insight of those who refused to look away. Psychologically, the incident offered insight into the cost of fame. Will Smith had spent decades mastering perception, but that mastery came at the expense of authenticity. The Oscar slap was a brief, violent rebellion of the real self against the cultivated persona. The applause he received didn't heal the fracture. It made the exposure permanent. Comedians and audiences alike could now read the cracks beneath the charm, and they couldn't be unseen. And in this reckoning, the narratives of Chappelle, Rock, and Williams intersected in ways that were profoundly instructive. Each took the pain of the moment, processed it through their craft, and offered something larger than entertainment: understanding. Comedy became philosophy, biography, and critique all at once. Through their interventions, Smith's moment of violence became a case study in authenticity, accountability, and the cost of masking humanity for decades. Will Smith's silence after these interventions is revealing. Unlike Rock, Chappelle, and Williams, he chose withdrawal over engagement. True accountability would have required confronting the narrative head-on, acknowledging the psychological portrait painted by the comedians, addressing the structural critique, and demonstrating personal growth. Instead, he allowed the story to be told by others, leaving his legacy defined less by his intentions than by the observations of those who refused to let it fade. The irony is stark. For 30 years, Smith built an image designed to endure scandal. He mastered branding, public perception, and audience trust. In seconds, the Oscars slap shattered that. Not because of a joke or a marital entanglement, not because of public criticism or media coverage, but because he chose to act violently in a public, controlled environment and then sought validation from the applause of his peers. That act, amplified by the interventions of Chappelle, Rock, and Williams, became inseparable from his career narrative. And yet, while one version of Will Smith's legacy has ended, the untouchable, universally beloved movie star, the human being remains. What lessons can be drawn? First, that fame does not absolve humanity. Second, that the consequences of actions are magnified when performed on the world stage. Third, that comedy, at its sharpest, is a form of accountability that can outlast PR campaigns, interviews, and apologies. As the years progress, the story of the slap continues to influence Hollywood and culture at large. Actors, comedians, and performers now navigate a landscape where accountability is unavoidable, where images can be shattered in moments, and where audiences demand authenticity. The Oscars incident is studied not only for its shock value, but for its cultural implications: the interplay of fame, anger, performance, and public perception. In the end, the night Will Smith slapped Chris Rock did not just alter a career, it altered an industry. Comedy, celebrity, and audiences were all forced to confront uncomfortable truths about power, performance, and accountability. Chappelle, Rock, and Williams ensured that this lesson could not be ignored, and that the incident would remain a touchstone for discussions about fame, vulnerability, and authenticity for years to come. One night may not have ended Will Smith's financial life, his connections, or his fan base, but it ended the era in which he could be viewed without the lens of that moment. The mask was off, the performer spoke, the story became permanent, and in Hollywood, permanence is far more consequential than any award, any box office hit, or any image carefully curated over decades. The saga of the Oscar slap teaches a fundamental truth. In an industry built on illusions, the truth will always find its stage, and when it does, it is the comedians, the ones who understand the stakes, the risks, and the art of observation, who ensure it cannot be hidden. Now that you've seen the full story, we want to hear from you. What do you think about Will Smith's legacy after that night at the Oscars? Can he ever fully recover, not just in Hollywood, but in the way audiences perceive him? Or has that one moment permanently changed how the world sees him? And what about the comedy world? Do you think comedians today feel the same freedom to speak their truth, or has the invisible fence been broken forever? How did Chris Rock, Dave Chappelle, and Katt Williams reshape the way we view accountability, fame, and performance in Hollywood? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Be honest, because this is a conversation that goes beyond entertainment. We want to know your perspective on one of the most defining moments in modern pop culture. If this video gave you a new way to look at Will Smith, Hollywood, or the power of comedy, make sure to hit that like button, share it with friends, and subscribe for more deep dives into the stories that everyone's talking about, but no one fully explains. Remember, the story doesn't end here. The conversation continues, and your voice matters. Join it now.